The bread sitting on your kitchen counter right now, the one you toast every morning, the one you give your kids, the one you trust because you've seen the brand your entire life, may not be real bread in any meaningful sense. It looks harmless. It tastes familiar. But once you read the label closely, it becomes hard to ignore what's actually inside. Bread is one of the most trusted, most purchased foods on the planet. It's marketed as wholesome, comforting, and essential. Today, we're exposing the brands betraying that trust. Today and next, I'll reveal the products in this category that are damaging consumers through toxic ingredients, deceptive labels, and predatory marketing. By the end of this video, viewers will know exactly what to avoid and what they should actually use instead. I'm not approaching this as a trend follower or a wellness influencer. I went through ingredient lists, processing methods, shelf life engineering, and real-world performance. How these loaves behave when you toast them, how they age, and what you're actually paying for. Bread is one of the most misleading grocery categories because almost everything here is legal, technically edible, and aggressively marketed as healthy, even when it isn't. Let's start the countdown. Wonder Bread Classic White is one of the most recognizable loaves in the world, and that familiarity is exactly why it keeps selling. People buy it because it's cheap, soft, and instantly associated with childhood lunches and simple meals. The brand has trained consumers to equate softness with freshness, even though that softness is not a natural quality of bread at all. It is engineered. The ingredient list tells the real story. This loaf depends heavily on refined flour, added sugars, emulsifiers, and chemical dough conditioners to create a texture that feels pleasant but offers no substance. Real bread firms up, dries out, and eventually goes stale because it's made from flour, water, yeast, and time. Wonder Bread resists aging because it's designed to. That long shelf life isn't a benefit to your body. It's a benefit to distribution and storage. In real-world use, the flaws show quickly. Toast it, and instead of developing structure and crunch, it collapses inward and turns rubbery. Use it for sandwiches, and it compresses under minimal pressure, leaving you with a dense, sticky bite. It doesn't absorb moisture properly, so spreads sit on the surface while fillings slide around. This isn't how bread behaves when it's properly fermented and minimally processed. Nutritionally, it delivers little beyond fast-digesting carbohydrates. There's minimal fiber, almost no micronutrient value, and a sugar content that adds up quickly when eaten daily. The price may be low, but the value is lower. You're paying for a loaf that fills space, not one that nourishes or performs well in everyday meals. This product survives entirely on habit and brand recognition. Once you stop assuming it's harmless and actually evaluate what it is and how it functions, it becomes difficult to justify keeping it in your cart. Pepperidge Farm Hearty White positions itself as a step above standard white bread, and many consumers accept that claim without question. The thicker slices, darker crust, and higher price signal quality and substance. It looks more filling, more real, and more suitable for adults who want something sturdier than soft sandwich bread. That perception is exactly what the brand is selling. When you look past the presentation, the formulation is still built around refined flour and shelf life preservation. Added sugars are used to enhance flavor and browning, while vegetable oils and dough conditioners are included to control texture and consistency. These ingredients exist to standardize production, not to improve nutritional quality or eating experience. The bread feels dense in the hand, but that density doesn't translate into meaningful satiety. In everyday use, the shortcomings become obvious. Toasting produces uneven results, with dry edges and a center that never fully crisps. For sandwiches, the slices often tear or crumble once moisture from fillings sets in. It promises heartiness, but it lacks the structure that comes from proper fermentation and simpler ingredients. What you're left with is a loaf that performs inconsistently despite its premium positioning. From a nutritional standpoint, this bread doesn't justify its price. Fiber levels are modest, protein content is unremarkable, and the refined carbohydrate base drives quick digestion rather than sustained energy. The added cost isn't paying for better grain quality or traditional baking methods. It's paying for branding, packaging, and a slightly altered texture. Pepperidge Farm Hearty White succeeds because it feels like an upgrade without actually being one. It's a comfort product for shoppers who want to believe they're choosing better while staying in the same aisle. Once you evaluate the ingredients, performance, and value honestly, it becomes clear that this loaf offers the illusion of quality rather than the real thing. Nature's Own Honey Wheat is designed to appeal to shoppers who want to feel responsible without giving up familiarity. The word nature suggests simplicity, while honey wheat implies wholesomeness and balance. For many people, that combination signals a healthier choice, especially compared to plain white bread. The problem is that the name does far more work than the ingredients do. At its core, this loaf is still built on refined flour rather than true whole grain. The darker color and mild sweetness come from added sugars, honey, and caramel coloring, not from a meaningful percentage of whole wheat. That sweetness makes it easy to eat, but also accelerates digestion, leading to faster blood sugar spikes and shorter-lasting fullness. The fiber content remains low for a product that presents itself as a wheat-based alternative. The processing is what allows this bread to maintain a soft, uniform texture for extended periods. Dough conditioners, preservatives, and added oils keep the loaf stable during transport and storage, but they also strip away the qualities that make bread satisfying. When toasted, it browns quickly but lacks depth, producing a thin crunch that disappears almost immediately. In sandwiches, it absorbs moisture unevenly, becoming soggy in some areas and dry in others. Price is another issue. Nature's Own Honey Wheat typically costs more than basic white bread, yet the nutritional improvement is minimal. You're paying extra for marketing language and color cues rather than better grain quality or traditional baking practices. It occupies a middle ground that feels safer than white bread, but doesn't deliver the benefits people assume. This loaf thrives in a category built on confusion. It's not overtly unhealthy, but it's far from the whole food option it suggests. Once you recognize how much of its appeal is constructed through labeling rather than substance, it becomes clear that it's a compromise masquerading as a smart choice. Arnold Country White survives almost entirely on familiarity. It's been on shelves for decades. It shows up in households generation after generation, and that long presence creates an assumption of reliability. Many consumers don't actively choose it so much as default to it. When a product feels established, people rarely question how it's made or whether it has kept up with better standards over time. The formulation behind this loaf reflects that complacency. It relies heavily on refined flour and a tightly controlled industrial baking process. Instead of long fermentation, which naturally develops flavor and structure, enzymes and chemical dough conditioners do the work faster and cheaper. This approach keeps production efficient and consistent, but it strips away the qualities that make bread satisfying. What you're left with is a loaf that looks uniform but lacks depth. In practical use, Arnold Country White shows its weaknesses quickly. When toasted, it dries out rather than crisping evenly, leaving a brittle surface and a hollow interior. It browns rapidly without developing real flavor, a sign of added sugars compensating for poor fermentation. In sandwiches, the bread tends to compress and tear, especially when paired with spreads or warm fillings. It doesn't hold its shape because it was never built for structure. Nutritionally, there's little to justify loyalty. Fiber levels are low, protein content is minimal, and most of the calories come from fast-digesting carbohydrates. This leads to short-lived fullness and a quick return of hunger, particularly for people who rely on bread as a meal base. The ingredient list reveals more effort spent on shelf stability than on nourishment. Price-wise, Arnold Country White sits in a middle range that feels reasonable, which helps it avoid scrutiny. It's not cheap enough to be dismissed outright, and not expensive enough to invite closer inspection. That positioning works in its favor, allowing it to blend in as a safe, neutral option. The larger issue is that this bread represents an older way of doing things that no longer holds up. Better formulations exist, and consumers have more information than ever. Arnold Country White continues to sell because people trust the name, not because the product earns that trust today. Sara Lee Classic White is engineered first and eaten second. Its entire appeal rests on convenience, consistency, and the promise that every slice will look and feel the same no matter when you open the bag. For many households, that predictability is comforting. The loaf stays soft for an unusually long time, resists mold, and never seems to dry out. Those traits are not natural characteristics of bread. They are the result of deliberate formulation choices. This product depends heavily on preservatives, emulsifiers, and added sugars to maintain its texture and shelf life. Calcium propionate extends freshness, while dough conditioners keep the crumb uniform and flexible. These additives make distribution easier and reduce waste for retailers, but they also create a product that behaves more like processed food than baked bread. The sweetness is subtle but persistent, altering how the bread reacts to heat and moisture. In everyday use, these compromises become obvious. Toasting Sara Lee Classic White often produces a misleading result. The surface browns quickly, sometimes even burning, while the interior remains spongy and underdeveloped. Instead of crisping, the bread steams itself. For sandwiches, it compresses under light pressure and fails to provide structure, especially when paired with warm or wet ingredients. The experience is soft but unsatisfying. From a nutritional perspective, the loaf offers very little in return for daily consumption. Fiber content is minimal, protein levels are low, and the refined carbohydrate base digests rapidly. This leads to quick spikes in blood sugar and a short window of fullness. For consumers who rely on bread as a staple, this pattern contributes to overeating rather than sustained energy. The pricing reinforces the illusion of value. Sara Lee Classic White is often positioned as an affordable, dependable choice, making it easy to justify weekly purchases. But when you factor in what you're actually getting, the value collapses. You're paying for extended shelf life, uniform appearance, and brand familiarity, not for quality ingredients or thoughtful baking. What makes this loaf particularly problematic is how normal it has become. Its flaws are easy to overlook because they've been normalized across the category. Once you compare it to bread made with simpler formulations and shorter ingredient lists, it becomes clear that Sara Lee Classic White is designed to endure on shelves, not to perform well on plates. Dave's Killer Bread White Done Right is the most disappointing product in this entire lineup because it doesn't just sell bread, it sells trust. This brand has built a reputation around ethics, transparency, and doing things better than the rest of the aisle. Shoppers believe they are paying for integrity, cleaner ingredients, and a smarter choice. That belief is exactly what allows this loaf to get away with far more than it should. At first glance, it looks like a reform of white bread. Organic labeling, confident language, and a price tag that signals premium quality all reinforce the idea that this is white bread without the usual downsides. But once you strip away the messaging, the formulation tells a different story. Added sugars are still present, contributing sweetness that has no functional purpose beyond taste manipulation. Seed oils appear where traditional bread would rely on fermentation and flour quality. The ingredient list is cleaner than bargain brands, but it is still engineered. In real-world use, this bread exposes its contradictions. It tastes noticeably sweet, even plain, which immediately sets it apart from bread made with restraint. That sweetness affects how it behaves when heated. Toasting produces rapid browning without depth, and the interior remains soft rather than developing structure. It behaves less like bread and more like a packaged baked good. For sandwiches, it holds together better than cheaper loaves, but that durability comes from formulation choices, not craftsmanship. Nutritionally, the disappointment deepens. The calorie count and sugar content are not aligned with what most consumers expect from a product marketed as a smarter staple. Fiber is present, but not at levels that justify the health-forward positioning. For the price, the nutritional return is underwhelming. You are not paying for exceptional grain quality or slow fermentation. You are paying for branding, certification logos, and narrative. The most troubling aspect is the price-to-value ratio. This is one of the most expensive white breads on the shelf. At that cost, consumers should be getting something fundamentally different. Instead, they are getting a refined product that still relies on sweetness and processing to appeal to a broad market. The brand story does most of the heavy lifting, not the loaf itself. This is why it earns the top spot. Other breads on this list are honest about what they are. Dave's Killer Bread White Done Right positions itself as a solution while quietly preserving many of the same problems. It capitalizes on consumer awareness without fully respecting it. When a brand asks for premium trust and premium dollars, the standard should be higher. In this case, it isn't. Here's the simple rule that cuts through all of this. Bread should not need a paragraph to explain itself. If the ingredient list reads like a chemistry worksheet, walk away. Real bread goes stale. Real bread uses fermentation, not conditioners, to create texture. Spending 10 seconds reading the label will save you money, reduce unnecessary additives, and give you a product that actually performs the way bread should. Bread doesn't need to be complicated. The industry made it that way. Once you stop letting marketing do the thinking, the shelf gets a lot easier to navigate.